the emotional cutting. Like I remember we had that day where we just spent us,
Tomas.
trying to get into indeed the setting that you just described, where it's moonlit, it's cold, you kind of you're sneaking around the sand. And then, all these, John just sits there sort of like saying things, and there's music, usually kind of too loud. You kind of can't hear John anymore, and then,
I do it so I can't hear all the others around me. So
but
that's
the thing, like, because John does his storytelling with clothes, it's, you have a lot of things to help you. So, he puts a hat on you and just squish it down so you can almost, it blurs your vision, and that already helps you. And it's just like, okay, you're walking.
So something I love about this is not new to this collection. It's very much something that John Galliano does all the time. Like, it's almost, a lot of his shows look like performance arts. The films look that way. Some of them, they're basically films. It's so interesting to see this relationship between the models and the muses, and how they truly, truly understand what John Galliano is trying to achieve in the show, down to the kind of gestures they should be using, the kind of emotions that they are supposed to be bringing forward. That to me is like, it's taking me back to when I first got into fashion, and the way that models used to be, where models used to sometimes channel an emotion. When you look at old Alexander McQueen shows, you know what I mean? Nowadays, modeling bores me to death, because models just, some of them don't even know how to walk properly. They just wear the clothes, there's no emotion, there's no nothing. It's just nothingness. So that is something I really love, to see this relationship with the models and the muses, and to really see that they truly understand what he's trying to achieve through this collection. And that's why they were able to so effectively translate that onto the runway, which is why then it became such a big show. So that's something that is really, really interesting for me, at least, to observe. Dami, any thoughts before we continue watching?
Yeah, I was looking for the collection, essentially, where he was talking, well, not where he was talking, but it was one of the pivotal collections in terms of like just how the show was presented and the actual mood that the models were just illuminating. Essentially, it was like a sailor outfit that was kind of in latex. It was like around 2018 time. Like, it was either before or after the Sprinkle 2018 show. But one of the main things was the value he put in the characterization and the personality of each person walking down the runway. So it really harkens back to a time in the supermodel era where people would be like glorified in a way in terms of how they walked down the runway. And obviously today that's not necessarily the case anymore, but what he did was, add that back in, and then the models each had their own characterizations. And this comes to, today what we're talking about with Tomas and all of his other muses, right? Or should I say his other muse, whereby he's working closely with them and they understand him, and that interconnectivity, right? And it also kind of fashions the way that, he adds the characterizations to his clothes. So when I'm talking to other young designers, I told them to look at this video and say, listen, like he's talking about the lived experience in clothes. Maybe you can't afford a muse today, but understand how people are actually going to live in the designs that you're creating. Of course, you want to make art in quotes, but there is a value of understanding. Listen, this person wants to sit. Does this person stand most of the time? Do they hunch? And all of these other things, right, that we learned from Balenciaga and now from Galliano.
Yeah, I totally agree. Let's continue.
In the rain, so you're trying to imagine that moment, and at some point, you really get into it, and you forget that anyone is in the room, and you're really in that moment. And I think it's the same for Valentine. You just kind of grow into those things, and before you know it,
he hasn't stopped. I don't know if you've noticed, he's given you about 7 different gestures just talking.
But that's the thing, like, John then says, okay, let's photograph it like this, and then it's like this very tense moment of like, oh shit, we have to get to the photo set without moving the pleats that we just made, because that is what we're trying to understand here, is like, how does that appear, and how does that become real? What this world means to Valentine and what this world means to me, you live it. It's really it's a strange thing that can occur, I think.
Be very careful the team you surround yourself with.
So I just wanted to quickly touch on, because I've been commenting, but I'd rather just say, like when Luke said the industry sacrificed its standards for the sake of body diversity, I don't think that's the issue. I think you can be plus size and be an amazing model, and you can like really show the emotion and bring forth the ideas that a designer had. It has absolutely nothing to do with size. I just think models these days are not, I feel like models these days think their job is to just kind of like pose in front of a camera and just be a face. Whereas there was a time when models actually helped tell the story of designers and they saw themselves that way, and there was a collaborative effort. Like if you think of all the muses, even going all the way back to designers in the 20th century, how closely they used to work with models, and there was always like this collective effort on, okay, how are you going to wear this? How are you going to do that? I just think that doesn't exist anymore. I think there's a lazy way that we view modeling these days, and the way that, you know, models walk, or the way models wear clothes, or if they should even have any say, or if they should show any emotion on the runway. I just think it's more an issue of a lack of creativity from both the designers and the models, rather than it having anything to do with size. That's why I mentioned Gwendolyn Christie, because Gwendolyn Christie is bigger than your average, you know, size 0 model. She's also quite tall, but she looked amazing when she worked with John Galliano, and she also really helped to bring the ideas forward. So once again, it's nothing to do with being plus size or not plus size. That's not the issue. I think it's an overall lack of creativity and interesting ideas that's killing modeling more so than anything else, and just like a lack of effort across the board.
Can I just talk about this quickly? Like, and
Oh yeah, for sure.
it starts in the design studio, right? And these designers, they have dress forms, and their dress forms are generally size 0 or maybe a 2 if we're lucky, right? And now people have to fit and worm their way into the designer's clothes, and they're basing their in off of who can actually fit in what they're creating. And then that's where we have this more so lounge aesthetic, and the proliferation of it is based on because people don't feel comfortable in designer clothes more than they did way back when designer clothes were actually the height of what people could create. And if you just like take the snapshot even further back, when, you know, Balenciaga and, you know, that whole batch, they were working with their clientele, and they formed their dress sense, their codes around what their clientele would be, not just their lifestyle. But I remember there was this one story about Balenciaga having this old lady that was one of his clients, and she had this hunch in her back, and then he would design for her, and then it would look like she's actually standing straight up and there was no more hunch there. But that's not what these people are doing, right? So when you say exactly that, what you said, it's like there is a lack of creativity, but also a lack of care and value for people living in the things that you're creating, right? And that's what kind of Galliano's putting in there. So when people say, oh yeah, you know, size 0, this, like, it's designers should be able to create for most all body types and make them still look beautiful. Obviously
100%.
that is in the most ideal world, but this is the thing about having a design sensibility. It's like, how much do you value the people that are wearing your things? And then on the model side, it's mostly like having the genification, as in the Kylie genification, right? So it's like having a dull person with a face actually wearing the clothes. And it's like, okay, yeah, you have someone who has bare followers on Instagram walking down the runway, but what do they stand for?
That's
What
the
do they
thing.
walk
So you
for?
notice those kind of models don't walk for Galliano, because can you imagine if we exchange these muses and put like Kylie Jenner and Kim Kardashian in their place to talk about the gestures of John Galliano? How do you think that conversation would go?
It goes so differently, and because we have more influencers run down the way than, you know, actual people that see this modeling as a profession rather than a post on Instagram, there isn't this massive value in, yo, my body is the instrument that I use to actually perform for the designs and the story that is being told by the designer. So the question designers have to ask themselves is, what story am I actually telling? And then the models question that they have to ask themselves is, how am I going to personify the story? And if neither of them are doing that job, or if none of that is being communicated, then we kind of get dull shows that, oh, we have to be hyper vigilant and concentrate on the actual clothes, for instance. And sometimes the clothes that are going down the runway aren't that valuable in the first place. It's just that we're getting a lot of eyes on them.
And this is a very good point, by the way. Like, models want to be the bad bitch in Dior or whatever, not bring the meaning of the clothes to life. But at the same time, these CDs aren't putting story into the clothes, so there's not much to work with. And that's exactly kind of what you said. It's a two-way street. And if the designers don't even have any story to start with, as a model, there's not really much to work with either. Which is why earlier I said it's a lack of creativity from both sides, the models and the designers. I just think that brands these days just want to do the bare minimum, which is fine, but that's why they won't be regarded on the same level as people like Galliano, right? This YouTube channel runs on your support. If you want to support the channel, you can subscribe to my Patreon. You'll gain access to exclusive content that includes everything from my Patreon podcast, where I give a behind-the-scenes insight into the fashion industry, as well as a fashion book club, where I review my favorite fashion books. You can also check out my fashion ebook, which highlights the best fashion journalists to follow, definitions of common fashion terminology, and how to determine what a good source of fashion information is. The links to everything are in the description below.